So I'll show you an example of standard checkpoint. So for this we'll use the flight application. This is the flight reservation screen of flight application. Now before starting, I'd like you to note few points, checkpoints. Checkpoints cannot be added manually. They are inserted using QTP's interface, and checkpoint information is stored in resource.mtr file, which is in the corresponding action folder. Now there's an action folder created for every action. So like in my case, I've saved my test 1 over here. There's an action folder. So inside my action folder I have 3 actions for test 1. If you open the action folder, you'll see .bdb. This is your local object repository for this action. So this is the information. 192 KB of file is stored over here. Script.mts is the script which you created for this action. This is stored over here. The snapshots are empty. So these are the different files which are created along with your test folder. Now I have also saved my shared repository explicitly. Shared test.tsr. These are the 3 shared object repository which I had created. And if you remember, shared test2 is the merge of these 2 object repositories. So all these files are saved over here. So these are your various resources which are available with your test. If you're creating a project, you need to have all this saved at a particular place. So we go back to checkpoints. Checkpoint is saved in that action folder with an extension of .mtr. Okay, now QTP and our application both are open. We'll check the record and run settings. It has to be a Windows application. I click on record. Now the code for checkpoint is generated in recording, so you don't have to type anything. Insert checkpoint. It's a standard checkpoint. Now standard checkpoint is applicable to different buttons or different objects like drop down, your edit list, etc. I'll click on this. This is the flight button, win button having flight text inside it. Now checkpoint properties, a new dialog box opens. If you see, this button is disabled. Now by default this property is checked. That is, the checkpoint is checking whether the property for that button is enabled property for button is false, and it is, in this case it is true. It is the enabled property is false. You can choose other options as well for your checkpoints. Now for now, suppose I'm just keeping this one option. This is what I'm checking for, that the enabled button is false. I click on OK. Now a code is generated. Now this is the checkpoint code. Now suppose I'll click on the stop button. So what this will do is, this will check whether the button is enabled or disabled, this checkpoint, and if it is enabled, it will throw false. The test will fail. Now when I run it, now when you see, when you open the results, you'll see passed 1. Now why it is 1? Because we have used one checkpoint and it has passed. That is, the button is disabled as expected. Now when you open this, expand all, you'll see checkpoint flight enabled false, and this is passed because pass is what we expected it to be. Now what I'll do is, now I'll show how this test can fail. I'll put some date over here, London to. Now if you see, this button has enabled. Now when I run this test, so you can see it is showing failed. and it also provides the screenshot why it failed. If you see, this flights button is highlighted, enabled, is false, the actual value is true. If you keep your cursor on this, it will show the actual value is true, that is, it is enabled, but this is the expected, which is, that is, it has to be false. If you see that there was some delay while running the script, that is the checkpoint timeout. It waited 10 seconds out of a possible 10 seconds. Now why did it do so? It waited for the button to get disabled for 10 seconds. So this is what happens when the checkpoint fails. It will wait for some time if the checkpoint can pass, and after that, if nothing is happening, it will throw the fail status. Now suppose my code is created here and I want to edit the checkpoint. So I have to right click on that checkpoint and click on checkpoint properties. This will help me to edit. So I can check for other properties as well, like the height. Suppose the height of the button has changed, which normally won't happen, but suppose there's some other build and developer, there's been a request from the client that we have to change the height of the button or the text inside it, then we can also check for this. But for now, we are only checking whether the button is enabled or disabled. So suppose if the client says that this button has to be enabled only after we insert these three values. So now after entering the three values, when we record, it will show enabled. So we can check, we can verify whether the button is enabled or disabled at any particular point of time in the code, and this will throw the pass or the fail status. Now you can edit as well. If I make it true, now this checkpoint will verify whether this button is enabled is true, and if this is not enabled, it will throw fail result. So you can manipulate this as well. You can change the expected result by just clicking on checkpoint properties, and you can change this. And one more thing is checkpoint timeout 10 seconds, that is, it will wait for 10 seconds before it throws the fail status. Now since we know a little about coding, I'll show you an alternative method by which you can verify whether the button is enabled or not. Checkpoint is just one of the methods of verifying, and using coding you can also verify the same thing. Now I'll put comment on this, so this line of code won't run. A few things that you have to remember during run is you have options like F5, which runs the code in one instance. You have option like F11, which will run the code step by step, and for every step you have to press F11. Okay, now I'll show you how you can do it using script. So first of all, I'll use a boolean value, true or false. Suppose my expected. There are certain coding standards which needs to be followed. Now boolean is like boolean values will have true or false. So suppose I want to say that my variable is a boolean, I'll write BLN or simply B, and then give some name, logical name to it, expected result. Now what do I expect? I expect it to be enabled, that is true. Now I have this object with me.